Hello. Welcome. Hello, welcome back to the channel. So, what I actually wanted to do is I wanted to do it, not even really a review, but basically I wanted to do my reading wrapped from last year, because one of my New Year's goals last year was I wanted to read 20 books, which for bookish people isn't that much books. But as someone who's not an avid reader, I am very happy with reading that amount of books this year. And also, my reading goals for last year was I wanted to read stuff that I haven't read before, like genres I haven't read before. Specifically, I wanted to read some nonfiction because I typically don't enjoy nonfiction that much, or not even enjoy, but I'm not super interested in nonfiction that much, or I haven't been in the past. And I think it's because I was only seeing memoirs or books from personalities or celebrities or entertainers that I like in one medium, and then they put out a book, but what I like about them in their medium, for example, let's say a comedy podcaster. Let's say I really like their podcast, and it has a very conversational tone that's very approachable and very friendly, and they put out a book. I would have tried to read their book, and then that same friendly, conversational, jokey tone, I don't really like that too much in a book. So that's something that has in the past put me off nonfiction books. And I'm not interested in memoirs. Maybe I should try a memoir one of these days. But I feel like a lot of them have that feeling about them where they're trying to be relatable and comfortable and jokey. And the kind of prose that I like is a little headier. Most of these books are pretty in line with what I would read typically. And there's a few things that I was rereading. The same book is on here twice. I asked some of my writing friends if it counts as two books if I read it all the way through twice in a year, and they all said yes, so I'm counting it. But a lot of the fiction books are probably more typical for me, but I have a couple of nonfiction books and a novel in verse, and that was me exploring a little bit with reading. I don't think I want to rate the books exactly, because I feel like sometimes you enjoy a book and it's in a fun, lighthearted, goofy way, and it's a 5 stars, but that's not the same 5 stars you would give to a book that was this fundamentally changed who I am as a person. This book is so important to me. So I don't know. I feel like I don't really think in a 5-star rating way. I'm just I liked it or I didn't like it. But I will say what I liked probably about each book. How about that? That's the best I can do. I don't think I have any duds. There might be a few books where I can say concretely, this is something I didn't like. But I'll try to keep it to that. I'll try to keep it to no spoilers. So the first book that I read in 2024 in January is called Pandora's Lab by Paul A. Offit. How I came across this book is Paul was a guest on the podcast Ologies with Allie Ward, which, great podcast. Do listen if you're a podcast enjoyer. The book is about popular ideas in science throughout history that were mistakes or led to devastation or like devastating events. For example, there's a whole chapter on eugenics, and that chapter's rough. But the first chapter really hooked me, and I think I read this entire book in one day, listened to it, because I did find it very like compelling and entertaining. It definitely kept my attention after the prologue. With some like scholarly books I've discovered in this process of reading some, the prologue, it's basically like the abstract on a scholarly article, or like if you have ever had to, for school, write an outline or summary of your ideas and like pitch it to your teacher for them to approve for you to write your paper. These books that I was reading, like the prologue is like summary of like why I'm writing this book, and this is what's included in it. As someone kind of new to this genre of nonfiction, I was like, these prologues are boring. So I was a little worried at first, but once I got into the first chapters, I was like, okay, I'm hooked. The first chapter is the journey through history from the earliest uses of laudanum and opium all the way up to the opium crisis of today. So that journey was wild. And really caught my attention, so much so that later in the year, I was inspired to read a book about pain clinics and the opium crisis. I really enjoyed this book, and I really wanted to talk about it and all the things that I was hearing and learning throughout the book to a lot of people. And I think for a nonfiction book about like history and science, that's something that it really advances the mission of the book if you can get people to like share these stories and be interested in these stories. I would recommend this book for people who are interested in a breadth of historical stories in kind of like bite-sized portions. Each chapter is pretty substantial. If you're someone who knows a lot about world history and these types of events, you might not like it. Like when I was browsing around trying to decide if I wanted to read this book, I did see some like reviewers and commenters saying like, hey, this is pretty basic stuff. This book wasn't worth reading for me because I know all of these things already. They're really like common or like really well known. But if you don't know about a lot of these things already, if you don't know about like trans fats or chemical warfare or DDT, then yeah, pick it up. I found it really interesting. It's kind of like pop sci, but real like science heads or real history buffs might not be into it. But I think I enjoyed all the books I read, because if I don't enjoy a book, I stop. Okay, number 2. The next book I read is Sunny Days by David Kamp. This is a nonfiction book as well. It is about the golden age of children's television in the 60s and 70s. So a lot of it is focused on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sesame Street, and that's where the title comes from. Sunny days, sweeping the clouds away. And the Electric Company, which I didn't ever watch the Electric Company growing up. So a lot of the information about the Electric Company was totally new to me. They also talk about Zoom and some older shows like, what's it called? Captain Kangaroo, I think it is. I don't remember how I came to find this book. I know. I was in that mindset of I really want to try out some nonfiction books, but I don't want to read memoirs. I want to learn something new. So I'm pretty sure I just looked up like nonfiction books or something like that, and I found it on some list. I have a personal interest in children's media, and specifically like educational media for children. I would love one day to be a part of a project. I would love one day to be part of a children's educational media project, like something really high concept, like the Teletubbies was, or like Sesame Street. That's really like one of my dreams. And I love Sesame Street. I love classic Sesame Street. And I love puppets, which is another reason why I love Sesame Street. So I saw this book and I was like, this is for me. And I did really enjoy it. I did learn a lot. It's a little dense at points, but I really just appreciated the knowledge. Let's see. Some of the things that I learned from this book were about what the landscape of children's media was like before and after Sesame Street and their impact. I would recommend it if you have an interest in TV, children's media, or I feel like even if you remember watching these shows, it's interesting to read about how they came to be, how they influenced wider culture. And something that was brought up in the book that was very interesting to me is the show Zoom and how they integrated user-submitted content. And when I think back on the shows that I used to watch as a kid, I did watch Zoom back in the early 2000s, but I watched a lot of Arthur, and they also included content that was filmed and made by kids just out in the world. The third book that I read this year is called When We Make It by Elizabet Velasquez, and it is a novel in verse. How I came upon this book is I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw a video of the author reading one of the poems in the book. I believe it's called New Yorican, that specific poem. And I was really like interested. I saved it and then I looked up the book. I saw that my library had the audiobook and that it was read by the author. I think novels in verse are really great to listen to, especially if they're read by the author, because you get it how they intended it. And also, this book is a little bilingual, so it's nice to have the author read it to me correctly the way it's supposed to be pronounced, and read the poems with the rhythm and the tone that they're meant to be read with. I don't know if it's fully autobiographical or semi-autobiographical, but a lot of the story is inspired by events in the author's life. This book is about a Puerto Rican girl, daughter of immigrants, growing up in New York, growing up low income, and just the events of her life, her struggles. They struggle hard. It's not giving rags to riches. It's a very grounded and like real type of story. If I was like an English teacher, I would assign A Tree Grows in Brooklyn next to When We Make It. Or if I was like a librarian and I was like New York Stories, I would put those two books together in the display. I did enjoy this book. It spans a long period of time. You see a lot into this family's life. Book number 4 for this year. One of my favorite books of all time. I read The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. This was a reread. And this was maybe like my third, maybe more, time rereading it, and I just love this book so much. If you have seen the movie The Neverending Story, that is only like the first half of the book. I came across this book because I used to listen to them more, but now I just listen to them periodically. The podcast Teen Creeps with Lindsay K. Ty and Kelly Nugent. They every week read a young adult or sometimes middle grade, but usually for younger readers, fantasy, horror, sci-fi, like Pulp Fiction type of book. And a while ago they did a fantasy month. So listening to their episode about the Neverending Story and how much they liked it and what they enjoyed about it made me really like interested and excited to read the book for myself. And even though it was spoiled by me listening to the podcast, I feel like that didn't affect my enjoyment of the book at all, or it may have even like influenced me to enjoy it more. But I don't know, because I can't unspoil myself and read it with fresh eyes. I love this book, and I love this book to an extent that's like, you know the way people love Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, and they're like, this is a self-help book. This book changes your life. This book like recontextualizes and teaches you so much wisdom. That's how I feel about The Neverending Story. The Neverending Story is important to me. So for those who don't know, The Neverending Story it's the story of a young boy, Bastian Balthazar Books, who is being chased by bullies one day and runs into a rare bookstore to escape or like wait them out. And when he's in there, he sees this gorgeous, beautiful book that captures his attention and just like arrests him. And as he is reading the book, he slowly begins to realize that the book is drawing him in, and he travels into the book and has adventures in the fantasy land of Fantastica is how it's translated in the book, because Michael Ende wrote it originally in German. In the movie, it's called Fantasia, but it's just like how it was stylized because that's a fantasy like name. Really love this book. Can't speak highly enough of it. I will say this is an old book and it has a little bit of old language, but overall it's not intended to be offensive. It's just dated. There's a type of fantasy that I really prefer that is a little kookier and weirder. I'll take anachronism if it's done well. I think The Last Unicorn, another book that I read because of the Teen Creeps podcast. Peter S. Beagle does anachronism well, where it's not like, it doesn't like pull me out of it. It's like, oh, okay. It feels like it's part of the world. I like some like goofier, whimsier fantasy that what grounds it is the emotional journey. Still in the vein of fantasy, but manga. My 5, 6, and 7 are, I read the Delicious in Dungeon books 10, 11, and 12. I must have read the other ones in 2023. Either I read them in 2023 or I forgot to count them in 2024. But 10, 11, and 12, I picked up the story there. I don't recall specifically what these 3 books are about, but the series, Delicious in Dungeon or Dungeon Meshi, the anime is out on Netflix as well, and it's pretty faithful to the manga. I would recommend either. I don't remember where I found like the description of this series, but it was just like internet searching and I landed on it and I was like, I need to read these. And at first I was reading them online on some website that just had a bunch of the chapters. And then after that I picked them up from the library. And the only reason I didn't finish the last 2 volumes, I think there are 13 and 14, is because they weren't out yet. But anyway, Delicious in Dungeon is I think it's specifically D&D, Dungeons and Dragons inspired fantasy. And if it's not specifically inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, it's that type of fantasy world. But specifically food is the problem that defines the series. The main character, Leos, is in an adventuring party with a few other people, including his sister, Fallon. In the opening scenes, they're fighting a red dragon, but because he's distracted by being hungry, Leos isn't paying attention when the dragon attacks him. His sister pushes him out of the way, and as the dragon is chomping down on and like eating her, she uses her last action to teleport the rest of the party outside of the dungeon. But all of their equipment and food and money is left behind when she does this. So Leos and a couple of members of the party re-enter the dungeon in the hopes of being able to revive Fallon before she's fully digested by this dragon. But to do that on the time crunch they're on, they don't have time to try to get more resources, and they decide to eat the monsters in the dungeon to live. So going into the series, I was like, oh, this is quirky, this is fun. But the longer it goes on, the deeper they go, the more complex and intricate the story becomes. I'm impressed by the author. I really like it. But throughout it kind of maintains some of that like comedy. There's also, if you love the like anime food drawings and stuff like that, it's full of those. The recipes look so like fun and good. I totally recommend the series, both the manga and the anime. I would say for people who don't like fan service, I would say it's minimal. Number 8, back to nonfiction. I read The Power of Cute by Simon May. This book is an essay, essentially, on cute psychology, what makes something cute, but not from the perspective of how, you know, how people say like, oh, it's small and round, it looks like baby, that's why our brains tell us that it's cute. Simon May himself compares his analysis of cuteness with a popular essay about kitschiness. His like theories and analysis are just in a different direction than like, it's small, it baby. It's like, why is Hello Kitty cute? And she's a combination of a girl and a cat. But a mermaid isn't necessarily cute when it's a combination of a beautiful woman and a fish. I came across this book because I was Googling something and it popped up. I have no idea what I was looking into, but it was something. Hello Kitty is such the like poster child for like ambiguous cuteness, and like there's almost like an uncanny valley of cuteness that like a mascot like Hello Kitty really dominates, because she has such an ambiguous identity, and that is what makes her cute. And then there's also the ambiguity of like her age, in that I think there are times where I've seen images that people have told me are Hello Kitty's parents, but I don't think I couldn't tell you who Hello Kitty's parents are the way I could tell you like, oh, Little Bear's parents are Mama Bear and Papa Bear. You know what I mean? She sort of has that indeterminate age where she holds the position of little girl, but she does adult things like traveling on her own, flying in a plane, driving a car. I literally have a Hello Kitty mug where she's in a plane. So It's so cute. Another element of cuteness that he talks about with ambiguity is there's some discussion on like sex and gender that I was like, I'm not sure about this. But I was thinking of it recently when, now Sunny Angels are really popular. I was telling some people, Sunny Angels all have penises, but when I look at them, I don't think of them as male or female in any way. Like, I don't think of them as having a gender or a sex. On the note of mischievousness, that's another thing that he brings up, how a lot of things that are cute are a little bit evil. He talks about Shirley Temple as being or looking really like mischievous and like impish, which I haven't watched a lot of Shirley Temple, but she is an icon of cuteness. I was, just because it's a real person and not like, fictional, does this like objectify her? Or it can also be said like, he's discussing her image and the roles he portrays. So like, that's fine too. So obviously this book gave me a lot to think about, and I'm still thinking about it to this day. There's a lot in the book, even though it's actually very short. I think the audiobook is only like 3 hours or something, but it's very dense. That was one thing that was kind of a downside. He packs all the information into a pretty short text, but it's kind of like a slog to get through it. I had to put it on hold, but I was like, oh, this book is so quick, people are going to finish it so fast. And it ended up being a way longer wait than I was anticipating. And when I started reading the book, I was like, I get it. This is a lot. I definitely think it's a worthwhile read if you're interested in this kind of thing. And I think that the dissection of what makes cute, I think is useful also for applying to if you want to create a cute thing. After The Power of Cute, number 9, The Neverending Story again. I told you I have a book that's on here twice. That's how much I love this book. And I really struggled not to read it a third time at the end of the year when I was like, I need to get a couple books in. Okay, 10th book. Another reread, but I hadn't read it for a couple of years, or probably longer. Well, let me tell you, the book is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And this is a horror fiction novel. This is another Teen Creeps inspired book. They did an episode on it. Where they stepped kind of outside their usual genres. Usually they do like YA, and this is more of a adult book. They did a Haunting of Hill House episode, and I was like, I need to read this book. I believe that was the first time I read it. But anyway, I've read this book multiple times. And the last time that I read it before this year was in probably 2021 probably 2021. I read it because someone who I was working with at the time was a big fan of the Haunting of Hill House Netflix series. And let me tell you, do not read the book and or watch the series expecting them to be similar to one another. They are absolutely not. And the series is good, but it made me mad because of the ways that they use the elements from the book. It's frustrating in a way that sometimes book to film adaptations are. I wouldn't say it's an adaptation at all. The plots are totally not similar. The character relationships aren't similar. Even the name Hill House has a totally different origin in the book versus in the TV series. So I feel like you can enjoy them both independently, but experiencing them too close together, if you can't like separate them in your mind, will be one, kind of confusing because the series uses a bunch of names from the book, but all the relationships are totally different, and it will be dissatisfying, or at least that's how it was for me. So, Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson it's kind of a psychological horror. It's like the mood of it is horror. The story is about a paranormal investigator who is wanting to run a long-term, I think they're there for a summer, like 3 months, if not less. But he's running a paranormal experiment and wants to bring people who have had paranormal experiences or things of that nature into this place that is thought to be haunted and record their experiences. So Nell, as a child, had a prolonged paranormal experience. There's a character, Theodora, who she was recruited through a different experiment. And then there is a member of the family who owns the house who is there for supervision. And they go to the house, they have these strange experiences. One thing that I find super compelling about this book, and specifically about Nell, is she's so pathetic in a way. You look at Nell, you experience Nell's like thoughts and feelings, and you want so much better for her because she's just so unfortunate in the things that have happened in her life, or not even necessarily the things that have happened in her life, but the things that have not happened in her life. The experiences that she doesn't get to have are what make my heart break for her. People always really glorify the idea of someone with a childlike imagination and say like, oh, the mind of a child, they're so creative, it's so beautiful, it's so this, so that. But when you actually meet an adult who thinks this way or acts this way with like a child's imagination, people don't accept them. And people can be very mean and cruel to them. I'm experiencing chaos because my battery's running out and I thought I had another one that was charged and it's not. But that was 1 through 10. So I'm going to stop here. And this will either be 1 video or 2. So if I decide not to film more tonight. So to wrap up Haunting of Hill House, I definitely pretty widely recommend Haunting of Hill House to people. If you like horror, it's a good read, but like psychological horror and like paranormal, supernatural horror, I recommend it. It doesn't have a ton of like blood, gore, shocking things like that. So if you're like, where are the kills? It's not that kind of horror. But that also means if you don't really like horror, or you're afraid of like the blood and the gore or like that type of fear, then Haunting of Hill House is more like a tragedy. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me talk about the books that I read in 2024. Stick around for part 2 coming soon. If you like the video, like the video. If you have something to say, comment in the comments. If you've read any of these books and do or don't recommend them, or if there's a book that you read last year or that you've read this year so far that you think, based on what I've read, that would be interesting to me, I would love to hear about it. And that's going to be it for me tonight. Goodbye!